I call the member for Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker. The great Baroness Thatcher once said, and I quote, "The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money." With 4 consecutive record deficits totalling a cumulative value of $172 billion net government debt, hitting unprecedented levels in excess of $147 billion and a $120 billion budget black hole, the economic mismanagement of the Gillard Labor Government is beyond anything ever seen before. Frivolously, they are spending the hard-earned money of Australian taxpayers, the mums and dads of Darwin and Palmerston, squandering the futures of our youth, racking up debt that will have to be paid back by our kids' kids. Now, only the Coalition can build a powerhouse economy, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker, through lower taxes, more efficient government and more productive businesses. On this side of the House, we are ready to restore hope, reward and opportunity, and we have a plan that will deliver real solutions for all Australians. This is in contrast to the Gillard Labor Government, who is plagued with instability, uncertainty and policy on the run. This government's pathetic inability to govern would almost be pitiful if they weren't gambling with the future of our kids. On the 20th of December last year, as people were preparing for annual leave, children were finishing school for the year and families were being reunited, Treasurer Swan announced on the sly or on the quiet that he couldn't deliver his promised surplus. This is the same surplus that was promised over 500 times by the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. As if this wasn't bad enough, the members of the government benches that have went out and put out taxpayer-funded newsletters across Australia saying, "We've delivered a surplus." Can you believe it? We've already delivered a surplus. I mean, what a joke. How naive does this Labor government think the Australian people really are? On the 20th of April 2011, Treasurer Swan said on the 7:30 program with Chris Uhlmann that, and I quote, "We see the surplus in 12/13 as being absolutely fundamental." On the 11th of May 2011 on ABC, the AM program, Prime Minister Gillard said, "It's vital to get the budget back into surplus. That is the best thing that we can do to help families with cost of living pressures." Well, what an absolute joke. How misleading, how despicable and how deceitful. And then to use a term that's used quite frequently by those on the other side, how mendacious. The Treasurer and Prime Minister have deserted their ironclad guarantee to return the budget to surplus. Constituents in my electorate tell me that they're not surprised that the Gillard Labor Government is reneging on its promise to deliver a surplus. They say this is the same government that would not cut private health insurance rebates and wouldn't introduce a carbon tax. Well, with these broken promises, my constituents say, with the Labor government having these broken promises under their belt, why wouldn't they break their budget surplus promise too? Well, I have to agree. But we know, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker, we know that Labor and the Prime Minister just can't be trusted. I mean, how can my electorate trust the Prime Minister when one of my constituents, who is a member of the Gillard Labor Government and a staunch Labor supporter, Senator Trish Crossan, can't even trust the Prime Minister? I mean, the question remains, is the Prime Minister so afraid of another leadership challenge that she chose to ignore Territorians? She chose to ignore her own rank-and-file members and shafted a senator who was dedicated to the Labor cause. But she was also dedicated to the member for Griffith. Poor Senator Crossan. There's been a lot of comment across the Territory about the Prime Minister's captain's pick and saying that, it wouldn't have happened in any other jurisdiction in Australia. So why does the Prime Minister think that she knows better than Territorians? Ted Dunstan of Karama said about the Gillard Labor Government in a letter to the editor in the Northern Territory News today, "We have been badly mistreated by the Federals in Canberra, neglected, dictated to and overridden. We can and should do something about this. This time, we can send 4 representatives to Canberra, all CLP, no Labor, to express our disgust and outrage over the treatment handed out at the hands of Prime Minister Julia Gillard and her dysfunctional anti-territory government. Well, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker, Ted's sentiments is being replicated across my community. My electorate is fed up with the Gillard Labor Government that is neglecting the Territorians and the Gillard Labor Government that thinks that it knows better than all of us. Further proof that the Gillard Labor Government is out of touch with Territorians was their response last week to the leaked discussion paper on developing Northern Australia. Straight away, the government attacked the plan. They labelled it wacky and ridiculed the coalition for a lack of detail. However, if they had paid any attention to local media commentary on the discussion paper, they would have seen that there was a positive and constructive response to the paper. On the 8th of February, the Northern Territory News labelled the plan a boom with a view and went on to the editorial to say, Coalition leader Tony Abbott's vision for Northern Australia is exciting. But instead of responding in a practical way and taking on the broad ideas of the discussion paper to develop Northern Australia, the Gillard Labor Government played politics, slammed the coalition and once again neglected Territorians. It's no wonder, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker, that the Territory is struggling with this government, treating them with such contempt. According to recent figures, confidence is down, and only further proof of this comes from the latest retail figures from the ABS. In the lead up to the Christmas, we saw clothing sales down by 0.7% in the Territory, and in November, retail spending fell by 0.9%, and in the September quarter, retail fell by 0.3%. Acting Madam Deputy Speaker, nothing is exempt from this bad Labor government. Small business is being strangled. Since 2007, over 20,000 new regulations have been placed on business and only 104 have been removed by the Rudd and Gillard Labor governments. This is particularly interesting because it was supposed to be one in, one out, and obviously they're quite behind in, I think there's about 19,900 that need to be taken out, yes. If it was the one-for-one rule. Businesses across the top end are also feeling the widespread effect of the Gillard Labor Government's appalling knee-jerk reaction to the live export ban in 2011. On this side, we fully support the $1 billion live export industry, and we welcome today the first shipment of live buffalo to leave Darwin since the introduction of the new animal welfare regulations. Now let's look at the Labor's record on border security and defence spending. Since Labor came into power in 2007, over 30,000 people have arrived illegally by boat. Over $6.6 billion has been spent by the Rudd and Gillard Labor governments on the asylum seeker debacle, all of their own making. And yet, in my EFO, they announced $1.66 billion worth of defence cuts. This is on top of the $5.5 billion already outlined in the budget. In the past 4 years, $25 billion has been cut from defence budget, even though the Gillard Labor government has cumulatively spent $172 billion more than they've earned during this same period. The total cuts amount to about 10.5% of the total defence budget. We've not seen this sort of level of cuts since the Korean War. Australia's spending on defence as a percentage of GDP ranks about 65 in the world. The United States currently spends around 4.7% of GDP, and the United Kingdom spends around 2.6% of GDP on defence. However, the Gillard Labor government this year will spend a mere 1.49% of GDP on defence, the lowest ever level since 1937. Madam Acting Deputy Speaker, defence personnel make up a high portion of my electorate, with approximately, or just under 10% of the electorate being defence people, many of whom are young, single ADF members aged in their early 20s. And I'm so proud to have been part of the campaign that the Coalition successfully mounted last year with widespread community support that forced the Gillard Labor Government to backflip on its disgraceful cuts that would have otherwise seen around 22,000 single ADF members aged between 21 or aged 21 and over denied the entitlement to travel home to see their families at Christmas time.
Well done, Natasha.
Only a coalition government will stand up for the most valuable defence asset, and they are our defence personnel. And that's why the coalition has committed, if we're fortunate enough to form government later this year, to restoring defence funding at 3% real growth out to 2017-2018, as soon as we can afford it. The cuts cannot go on any longer. Our national security is being put at risk. In a rare public warning, the Army Chief General David Morrison cautioned the Gillard Labor Government, saying that the current straitened fiscal climate poses a risk to the Army's approved plan for development out to 2030. And it's not only defence that's suffering the MyEFO cuts. The Gillard Labor Government announced $3.9 billion in education cuts, which Treasurer Wayne Swan claimed to be responsible. Well, this is not responsible, this is reckless. And in the past 5 years, literacy and numeracy results around Australia have been going backwards. Sadly, the Territory in every single category of reading, persuasive writing, grammar, punctuation, spelling and numeracy is the worst performing jurisdiction in Australia, with around 30% less Territory students are achieving the national minimum standard than anywhere else in the country. In 2012, only 62.3% of the Year 3 students in the Territory were at the minimum level for grammar and punctuation. Nationally, it was 92.9% of students. For Year 9 students in the Territory in 2012, only 55% were at the minimum level standard for persuasive writing. Nationally, it was 81.7%. This is just not good enough. It's not acceptable that Territory students are allowed to be so far behind the rest of Australia. The Gillard Labor Government's actions to cut $3.9 billion from education in MyEFO is not responsible. As the Treasurer claims, it's completely and utterly irresponsible, and I'm sure every single Territorian will agree with me. The NAPLAN results of Territory students are going backwards. Of the students who were in Year 3 in 2009, 68.5% met the minimum standard for reading. When they completed NAPLAN again in 2011, this number had dropped to 61.8%. In 2008, 75.9% of Year 7 Territory students were at the national minimum in numeracy. In 2010, when this group was tested again, it fell to 70.5%. In January, Camilda College, a fantastic private school in my electorate, the largest boarding school for Indigenous students in the Territory, announced they were considering closing their boarding house because of funding cuts by the Gillard Labor Government, which was making it unsustainable for the school to continue providing boarding facilities for Indigenous students. If this occurs, 220 students from outback communities across the Territory will be forced to leave Camilda, and where will they go? Just last week, the Prime Minister spoke about educational opportunities for everyone in her Closing the Gap speech, and yet it's her cuts that are stripping Territory kids from remote communities a chance to be educated. Camilda is currently running at a shortfall of $500,000 thanks to Labor's cuts, and in a bid to reduce the impact of this and maintain the Indigenous program, the school since 2009 has reduced enrolment numbers and cut around a quarter of their staff. I've raised this before in this place, but yet the cuts have still occurred. Camilda's principal, David Shrinkfeld, has said we are in financial difficulties based on the change in funding that's taking place. I'm fed up, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker. My electorate is fed up with the way which the Gillard Labor Government just trivialises the lives of Territorians. Only the Coalition has a plan for Australia. Only the Coalition can restore the hope, reward and opportunity for the people of Solomon, for the people of Australia.
Hear, hear.